So first, a little bit about my background. I went to Japan as a foreign exchange student for 9 months when I was out of high school. So I was actually 18 years old, but I went to high school when I was in Japan. I had 2 years of formal Japanese instruction in high school before I went, and in addition to that, I was a huge anime otaku. I watched tons of anime. I probably watched like at least 2 to 3 hours of anime daily. I had many anime song CDs, and I listened to anime music all day and sang anime music all day. I didn't even know what it meant a lot of the time, but I would sit there with my dictionary and I'd like work through the songs and I'd try to figure out what everything meant. I also tried to work through manga. I made it through like the first 7 volumes of Ayashi no Seres because I was like, they were only up to volume 7 at the time before I went to Japan. I'm really dating myself now. I could read and write hiragana and katakana, and I could also write about 100 kanji. Actually, Japanese was not my second language. It was my 3rd language. German was technically my 2nd language. I learned that when I was a child because my dad translated German for a living and he's fluent in German. I also went to Samstagsschule, which is Saturday school, and I took 4 years of that in high school as well. So when I went to Japan, my German was actually, I was much more proficient in German than in Japanese. I am still learning Japanese. I'm also still learning English, and all of you are too that are watching this video. Language is huge. There are so many words, so many idioms, so many proper grammar usages that I still don't even know in my own mother tongue of English and in Japanese. So the whole question of fluency and learning a language and being able to speak a language, that's not really a black and white, you either can or you can't. There's many different levels. And you've probably heard the whole adage of if you want to learn a 2nd language or 3rd language, or if you want to learn languages, it's best to learn it when you're a child, like when you are young. Generally speaking, by the time you're 18, you've kind of lost that whole, oh, you're a child, you're a sponge, you pick up things really easily. So I doubt that there's much difference between the age of 18 and the age of like 38 in terms of how well you can pick up and learn a language. So that kind of already answered the second part of that question, is your 30s too late? Not really. Everybody learns differently too, not just languages, just everybody learns differently. And there are many different ways in which a person can learn a language, regardless of whether or not that person is actually in the country where that language is primarily spoken. I'm not an expert on this subject. I am one person who has had one experience. So take whatever I'm saying with huge chunks of salt. So month 0, i.e. the day I arrived in Japan, I could communicate a lot of very basic things like, hi, my name is Sarah, I like pizza, where's the bathroom, things like that. And I could also comprehend basic things like that. I could carry on conversations, simple ones. People claimed that I sounded fluent, that my accent was perfect, which I think is probably partially just them being nice and being Japanese and just automatically being like, oh my god, la la la, I'm gonna compliment you, because Japanese people do that, especially for a foreigner. And it could have just been that they were just shocked that I could speak Japanese at all because I'm white. Now I'm gonna have people trolling in the comments being like, yeah, your accent sucks when you said that one thing. But I had a really difficult time understanding conversations people were having with each other. Just when they'd go off and jabber on their own, I would pick up a word here and there or a sentence here and there, but I couldn't really understand what people were saying when they were talking to each other. I also had a hard time understanding most of what was happening on TV, except children's programs. Speaking of children's programs, how I spent my days when I first got to Japan, even before I started school, was I watched a lot of TV, I rented a lot of anime from the local video shop, but yeah, I watched a lot of children's shows, anime, then I watched Music Station and Hey Hey Hey, Music Champ, like those variety music shows. I read probably about 3 volumes of manga daily. I didn't understand a lot of what was happening in the manga, but shoujo manga has furigana next to the kanji, so I could get through it without even knowing a lot of the kanji. Pretty much any conversation I was having was with my host mom, my host grandma. I didn't really talk to people my own age. When I started school, I still didn't quite talk to people my own age. They were all kind of like, oh, Kaijin, she's tall and pretty, I don't want to talk to her. And I was like, people I don't know, I don't want to talk to them, I'm shy. So we didn't really talk to each other much. And speaking of school, I didn't really participate in the classes unless they were activity classes, like cooking class or wasai, which was like Japanese arts, or Japanese tea ceremony. I joined the Japanese folk dancing club, Minzokubuyobu, or Minbu for short. But yeah, classes that were like brainy, like chemistry, biology, history, Japanese. English class was hilarious. I mostly just kind of sat there and smiled awkwardly as they practiced English. Actually, they didn't even practice. The teacher just like talked the whole time. Japanese classes are very lecture-y. There's just not very much participation, but that's another vlog. So anyway, during those classes that were like, you know, non-participation classes where the teacher just stood there and lectured, I read manga. My host mama also got me little kanji workbooks for first, second, and third graders, and I went through those and practiced kanji. So by month number 2, I was all of what I just mentioned, but just a little bit better. I could understand a little bit more of other people's conversations. I could say slightly more complicated things. And it was actually during the second month that I realized that I was now more comfortable with Japanese than I was with German. I was visiting some Rotarians. These people had 15 cats. It was amazing. And I stayed for dinner, and the wife came home then. She revealed that she actually had good German as well. I was like, oh yeah, I speak German. And she's like, dann können wir Deutsch sprechen. And I was like, ja, ich will Japanisch. And I was blanking. I was trying to speak German to her, but I realized that every time I was trying to think of a German word, a Japanese word came out. And it was then that I realized I sort of just have 2 modes, English and not English. And German was my not English, but now Japanese was my not English. Month 4, I had another little turning point. I caught myself thinking to myself in Japanese for the first time. It was little, I was just kind of thinking to myself, and it was probably something like harahetta, or nemui. And I just realized, oh, I'm thinking in Japanese. That's kind of weird. But it wasn't like this sudden, oh, and now the floodgates are open and all I'm doing is thinking in Japanese. It's just like occasionally I'd notice like little phrases here and there I would start thinking to myself in Japanese instead of in English. Another thing that happened around the 4-month mark is I started dreaming regularly in Japanese. Now, when I've heard people in the past talk about their language learning experiences and they're like, oh yeah, and then I started dreaming in the language and it was really cool and I was back at home and all my friends were speaking the language and it was so weird. It's like I never have Japanese dreams like that. If I'm dreaming in Japanese, Japanese people are speaking Japanese. I never dream about people who can't speak Japanese speaking Japanese. Like, it was also around the 4-month mark, this was around Christmas, and my second host family got me the first 6 Shigeyugi novels, and I started working really slowly through those. Now, those did not have furigana next to the kanji, so my host dad at the time also gave me a kanji dictionary, and it was just a Japanese to Japanese kanji dictionary, and I didn't know how to look up kanji back then. There are 2 ways to look up kanji. One is you look up the radical, and I explained this on a different video. But the other way, which is the more tedious way, and the way that I knew how to look them up back then, was you count each and every single brushstroke, and then you go to the index, and it's like, it's a kanji that has 14 brushstrokes, and then you like look through every single kanji in that list until you find it. So it was very tedious, but I learned a lot of kanji by doing that. I still didn't really participate in my classes at school unless they were activity classes. Skipping ahead to month number 8, and this is right before I left. By then, I had been promoted to Sannensei. I joined the school year in September, so I was sort of like in the middle of their term. And so I was Sannensei for like 2 months and then I went home. As a Sannensei, I got some new teachers and they didn't buy the whole, oh, I'm a foreigner, I don't understand Japanese, I'm just gonna sit in the back and read manga. So my math teacher was like, you can do this. I'm like, yeah, shit, I can. And so I started participating in the classes more. And I remember in history once, I was literally reading Kamikaze Kaito Jan, the manga, at my desk, and then I heard him say Jandarku, and I was like, Was he talking about my manga? Is he calling me out for reading manga in class? But he was actually talking about Joan of Arc. And I was like, oh, sweet, I actually understand this. And I listened to his lecture. I was having more conversations with my classmates as well. I didn't really have any friends when I was there, by the way. I'm really bad at making friends, so that wasn't anything. Don't feel sorry for me. Yeah, and I could say many more things, I could understand many more things, and I could understand people's conversations a lot better now on the side. I could understand a lot more of like regular TV as well. It didn't have to be children's TV for me to understand it. And I could read so many more kanji now as well, probably just from all that manga reading. I still, by the way, I have been reading about 3 volumes of manga every day that I was in Japan that year. So by then I had read like like 700 volumes of manga. No, that's probably about right, because by the time I came home I had like 1,000 manga. Anyway, by the time I left Japan, again, fluency much better, and everyone said that I had picked up the Mizusawa accent, which I'm like, I don't quite even know what that is, but whatever, I'll believe you. Now I'm going to break down what I did to learn the Japanese language while I was living in Japan that was exclusive to living in Japan versus what was not exclusive to living in Japan. Because there are lots of things that I did to learn the language that I could have done living anywhere. I didn't have to be living in Japan, especially now with modern technology. So these are the things that I did to learn the Japanese language that are exclusive to Japan. I could not have done them living anywhere else. I talked to people, and I heard people talking around me all the time. So the first thing, the talking to people thing, I actually did not do very much. Like, I should have done more. That's like one of the regrets I have about having been there, is that I just didn't practice talking that much. I only really talked when I had to. I'm just not a friendly person. I'm not a social person. I don't go out of my way to have conversations with people. So that's kind of why that was the way it was, which is unfortunate. But definitely the listening to people talking all the time, just everywhere, just hearing it. I remember my first few months in Japan, I would sleep 10 hours a night because my brain was exhausted just from the overload of so much. I don't understand all of these words hitting me in the head all day, every day. And then here are the things that I did to learn the Japanese language that are not exclusive to living in Japan. Reading manga, memorizing and singing songs, and watching Japanese TV. Now back in the day, those 3 things, especially the watching Japanese TV, were difficult to do outside of the country because it was the 90s. But nowadays, I mean, anyone with a computer and a decent internet connection can do any of those things from home. Here's part 2. I went to Japan like 15 years ago. My comprehension of the language is so much better now than it was before. Occasionally I'll monologue to myself in Japanese just to see if I can still do it. And despite the fact that I rarely speak Japanese anymore, I still feel like I can speak it better now than I could 15 years ago when I was living there. And that's because, like I said, I'm still learning technically. Since coming back, the things that I have done to work on my Japanese are I took some college classes, which were mostly review for me, but easy A. Watching anime and reading manga, although now I barely ever do that anymore. And translating. And nowadays, now that I'm not in school anymore and I'm not trying to do anything else and I'm not struggling to find translating work anymore, I'm translating between 4 and 8 hours daily, 5 to 6 days a week. I do listen to Japanese music and I do sing along with Japanese music sometimes. I even go to the local Korean karaoke place sometimes because they have Japanese songs and I can sing karaoke in Japanese. But like I said, aside from occasionally when I'll monologue to myself, I don't talk in Japanese ever. And aside from whenever I translate anime, which I haven't been doing recently, I don't really hear Japanese that much either. It was like a sort of a state of mind thing. A lot of the things that I did to learn the language, like reading the manga, listening to the songs, memorizing songs, watching anime, like I could do that at home, but since I was in Japan and my primary objective while living there was to learn the language, it just put me in that mindset, so I learned it better. And then the other thought is that doing things like reading manga, listening to music, watching anime, taking Japanese classes, that kind of stuff, that gives you a good certain kind of proficiency in a language. Like it gives you an intellectual understanding of the language. But one thing that you can only really get from immersion in the actual country in which the language is spoken is that it's really hard to explain, but language has an emotionality to it. And you just can't really learn that from a textbook. You just can't really learn that by reading about it. You have to really live in the culture and be around the people and have actual experiences and relationships with people in Japanese, in that language, so that you can associate words and expressions and things with feelings rather than with dictionary definitions. I hope that this extremely long video was informative and useful, and this only covered the Japanese language learning aspect of my year abroad in Japan. If you have any other questions about my year in Japan, or about Japanese translating in general, go ahead and leave the questions in the comments. Also, if you have experience living in Japan and learning another language, or living in any other country and learning that language, go ahead and write about your experience in the comments. Because like I said, I'm one person and your experiences will vary.